Hello and welcome to the last day of the World Hemophilia Week by the EHC. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the think tank and introduce Naya Rasmussen, who has recently joined the European Hemophilia Consortium team. With that, I will hand over directly to Amanda Bocker, CEO, for this part of the conversation.
Thank you, Declan. So it's my pleasure to spend the next several minutes having this conversation with Naya. And Naya, to welcome you again, but this time publicly, onto the EHC operational team. It's really a pleasure to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. It's absolutely a pleasure to be a part of the operational team with a lot of new, interesting tasks ahead of us.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of that in these next several minutes, but maybe before we do, I thought it might be interesting for our listeners to know a little bit about some of the background you bring professionally and academically. And maybe I can start by saying I remember the very first time I met you, which I would almost venture to say might be a decade ago or close to it, in any case, something long. And being so impressed that you have your master's degree from SOAS, which, for people who don't know, stands for the School of Oriental and African Studies, which was just down the road from where I was studying in London at the London School of Economics in the Development Department. And those of us at Destin, was the name of the department, always looked to SOAS like the real deal, the people that were really doing development and really got it. So maybe just humor me a little bit. Tell us a little bit about SOAS and why you went there and what it meant for you. And do you see a connection between SOAS and the think tank?
Yeah, it's true. I went to SOAS, which is, I think you can say, the alternative university in London.
Yes,
we always
true.
looked down the road to LSE, London School of Economics, and thought, oh, this is where the really academic, tough professor type go.
This is where the posh people go.
This is where the posh people go. And we randomly came by once in a while to listen into some of your lectures, and then we went back home-ish to our alternative way of seeing the world. I think I had an interest. I was studying geography in Copenhagen, and I also went to Canada to study geography and I went to Canada basically to get also a variation perspective of the world, to understand if you come from a not European background, how do you see the world then? And I was studying a lot about China and Southeast Asia. And I think building on that, I felt that I wanted to go to another kind of school where I could keep learning about the world from different perspectives. And that's why I ended up at SOAS, which is a bit of an alternative school. They have a very strong profile in development studies, a very strong profile in diplomacy, in languages, in trying to ensure that we don't just focus on Europe, but we focus on what is outside Europe and how we all connected to one another and how do we shape each other. And it is, when you go to such a school, it is extremely international environment. I've never met that many nationalities in one classroom and that many different backgrounds in one classroom. I remember we had an introduction round in one of our tutorial sessions where we had a biochemistry, a journalist, I was geography, one from politics, one from economics, one from social science, and you had like all these extremely different academic backgrounds. And then you also had people from, I think if you were 10 in a room, sometimes from 6, 7 different countries. So you really need to try to understand each other from how do they see the world. I was a good friend with a girl from Egypt, and she had a background in economics. And when she came to SOAS, she was like, oh, so you can understand economics in a different way. We were never taught that you could see it in a different way. And I think that sort of opened my eyes a bit more to that you kind of need to understand a little bit more of where people come from to understand how you can actually do some kind of change. Because the development sector is very much about changing the world to the benefit of everything.
I completely know what you mean. I had the exact same experience in London. And I suppose it's a mix of it, it being London and what we chose to study, but there was indeed this having to see the world through the eyes of different stakeholders, having to approach the issues through their perspectives as well as our own to find the middle ground, which is, funnily enough, a lot of what we're trying to do with the think tank, isn't it? We're trying to do this thing that is called systems change. It's a term that's often cited. It's often cited wrongly. It's an inward, but you know what it really means. Would you like to share with our listeners?
I don't know if I completely know what it means, but I definitely have an opinion of what it can mean, because it can be a buzzword, basically, obviously, like with innovation and with all of these things. But I think generally the system change is very much about trying to understand the system and then work thoroughly to shape it to what you actually want it to be. And what you personally want it to be is not the same thing as what it is that we want it to be. And I think it's not one person who's supposed to drive, this is just the way it goes, but we have to have a common vision about what is it, what kind of system, what kind of society is it that we want. And if you dare to sort of develop that vision and understanding of the system you want, then you need to step back and say, okay, so what is it? What system is it we have today? What are the challenges? What are the barriers to get to that different kind of system that we actually want? And I think in development studies, that's a lot into that, because it is thinking about it from an institutional point of view, a sustainable point of view. You can't just make one small project and then you will change the world. Then you will only change it for that few people or those just involved in the project. You need to think, you need to be a little bit more ambitious. And you need to be more strategic, and you need to be long-term thinking. You can't just do it in a single project. It's not fundamentally gonna change, I think.
Sharing the system we all inhabit, seeing what are the challenges for all the players in that system, and defining together with them what would the solutions for them be to find the solution that works for everyone. Absolutely. But why now? Why do you think, I mean, I know what I think, but why do you think this is the right time for the think tank in our specific community, in our corner of that healthcare system?
Well, it's always difficult to say if this is the perfect time. I think sometimes you also just need to dive into it. But I think, to be honest, I've been in this space for quite some years. I think I've at least volunteered for maybe about 15 years, and most of the time I've been lucky enough to be also in a decision-making body, so it gives you more insight of some aspects. I keep learning. I get surprised every day about how much information I don't have about this community. But that said, I think we are at a state today, in particular in Europe, where we have extremely good options for treatment. We have a very developed treatment system. There's a lot of things not working well. There's a lot of groups whose needs are not met. They are underserved in this community. And I know that in particular for the VWD and the women's groups. But it also tells us that we have developed this far, but we're struggling to move the next step by the ways we kept, like we've done for many years. And we keep banging into the same walls. For example, the registries. It's been an ongoing conversation. It's been so many tries over the years, but we keep not getting to the right solution. And I think that we are in such a good state right now that if we really want to make it this more system change, and we want to make it more into a system that we actually like, that we actually could benefit of, then we need to step one step back and really define what are the barriers so we can't get there. And then we need to tackle those barriers, but we need to tackle them together with all the stakeholders, because we've been working parallel for many years.
Yeah.
With a classic example is that the pharma companies developing an app, the national member organization developing an app, and then maybe also the universities developing an app, and they can't speak together, and nobody knows who owns the data, and blah 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 blah.
Everybody doing their thing in their corner. Yeah,
they do, and that's not really going to take us where we want to be.
Yeah,
I think
so. This consolidating the community effort and working together rather than in silos is what you're saying.
I think so, yeah. But I think it's also, I think it would have been difficult, but maybe it would have been possible 10 years ago. It's difficult to say, but we are in a good shape right now. But we also, the whole world has been shaken up, right, with the COVID and the pandemic. So suddenly you realize that e-health can actually work.
Yeah. Suddenly people have been mobilized and have made the impossible possible, right? These barriers that used to be imagined to some extent are now suddenly torn down, and absolutely we need to capitalize on that. So some of our colleagues spoke to our listeners this week on advocacy and public policy, and defined a little bit about their work and where public policy fits in the spectrum of advocacy. Where do you think the think tank fits in the spectrum of advocacy?
I think advocacy can be quite different things, in the sense that there is the more traditional political advocacy where you almost lobbying or have very close collaboration or engagement with politicians in particular. But advocacy can also be making a movement and making a collective movement in which you have more stakeholders together that becomes kind of ambassadors in their own sectors, and that can change. And I think that's the space for the think tank, and that is the idea of creating a stronger movement, a stronger vision together about what it takes to change, and that can break down some of these silos. But it also, again, sometimes you need to recognize that there is sectors, there is silos, and there is, but the walls have been very thick for many years. And but now if you can bring people together and have one platform where they meet, then there will be the ambassadors going back and change what is needed in their sectors to continue to create a different system. And I think that's very much the space for the think tank to do that.
As in the these stakeholder groups, that getting them out of their silos, identifying the challenges through their perspectives, co-creating the solutions all together, and then all those stakeholders go back to their parts of the system, fighting for and advocating for the same one solution we've all come up with, and being that's what you mean with ambassador?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a different, there's still some elements of traditional advocacy in that, but it's also challenging the advocacy, because it means that you, as for example, a patient organization, is creating the platform where people can meet and be the advocates, and then they become advocates in their sector. So that it's not the classical patient organization advocate who's doing everything. So I think that's a bit of changing the perspective a little bit into the sort of more traditional advocacy, but I think it's not one thing or the other.
No, it's
complementary. It's complementary. Yeah.
It's like the Swiss cheese model to the COVID pandemic. But I like what you said about, because we started with this notion of, adding this new layer, doing advocacy a bit different, but you're leaving us with the thought of, it's not just doing the advocacy. In fact, we're creating new advocates. Who will be the advocates, plural? That's changing too. Well, hopefully, if we succeed. So how's the think tank gonna work? Specifically, do you want to share some of our thoughts for operationalizing it and tangibly speaking, what are people going to do specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's obviously something that is continuously under development, and please also add in your ideas, because it's not set in stone quite yet about the whole thing. Since I've been working on this for 3 weeks, still in the making.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries, no worries. So we have a council in our government structure that helps us give us input on key issues to discuss, but also key people to talk to. And that gave us it's very nice to have a council that can help us with that. There's more ears, more eyes in the field to identify interesting people. But then we're gonna work also with something that we call work streams, and it's a little bit like a working group, but the work streams are gonna work with specific topics. So one is going to work with registries, for example, and trying to figure out what is it that makes it so difficult, and then what is the solution. And that's not necessarily an easy process. And for some people, it can seem, I don't know, it can be difficult probably to work on registries again, because it's a topic that we always talk about.
Right, that same old thing, yeah.
Same old thing, but I think the interesting is that we actually go back and say, okay, what is the issue in the different sectors, and why is it so difficult to find something to do together? Also, when we talk about the funding of it, we talk about national, European, international level, what are the issues here? And when we have the work streams identified, which will be a lot of stakeholders, then they have to identify the problems, but they also need to come up with the solutions, and hopefully also help implement solutions in time.
Yeah.
So that's the idea. I think we're gonna draw on different methods. For example, human-centered design thinking, because we really need to go from the idea to a prototype and to test it to see what works, what doesn't work, before we put a lot of effort into just one thing,
right?
And then implement it. So that's at least what I've been working on, trying to make it more concrete with that. But I also know that you've also been good at implementing the Chatham House rules. So if you want to explain a little bit why you think this is relevant to have in.
Yeah, the Chatham House rule, as you know from your background, maybe listeners are familiar with it to some extent. The Chatham House it's an institution that's quite important, that exists in the UK and has been a place of conversation, and has had its heyday in history as being a place of enabling peacekeeping, peace, conflict resolution type conversations to happen, and the way that it has enabled that is that it's quite strict about this rule, which is why it's called the Chatham House rule, and that is that when you partake in that conversation, you contribute freely of your expertise and your thinking, and what you say will not leave the room in a manner that identifies you personally or your institution. So it becomes about the ideas, and it's meant to create a safe place for the ideas, so that we can really work with everything that's put on the table without jeopardizing anybody personally or professionally in their institution. And I wouldn't say that I've implemented it, I've mandated it. I hope it will work. But if we can get heads of states and people under incredibly difficult political, social circumstances to respect Chatham House rule, I would hope we could get the actors around our health system to do so as well.
I think so, but I think it's also necessary because you need to be in a safe environment, so to say. If you need to really be open and share what the barriers are, but you also need to be creative and find solutions. You need to make sure, you need to be in a place where you feel comfortable about sharing this information. These types of information is going to be extremely useful for the entire process.
Exactly.
And I remember when I was working with some high level people from different companies in Denmark, they were meeting about 4 to 5 times a year, and they were discussing a lot about their personal leadership, or being a CEO, or being a vice president of organizations, or being division managers or something. And what was extremely essential in those meetings was that people felt comfortable about sharing, because if they weren't comfortable about sharing, the conversation would be fairly boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you need to be comfortable, you share, maybe it doesn't, in those cases it was also a lot of like personal perspective of being in a certain position, and if somebody was brave enough to say this is difficult, or I found this is a challenge, then the other ones will open up and share their input. And I think even though here we are talking about very thematic topics like registries, it can you still need to be open and brave and share information for us to move anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to dare. You have to dare to be vulnerable. You have to dare to be open. You have to dare to put your ideas out there and have the reassurance that it'll be okay. I think daring is the word that summarizes all of the think tank. we have a lot of road yet to pave, but that's the exciting part, isn't it? The getting to find the methodologies, getting to be, you used the word creative before, about how we make it work. And that's something I found really cool about you as well when you applied for the position, because you bring not only your volunteer perspective and your patient perspective and everything we've already discussed, but you're quite active as well in your semi-professional, professional and private lives with the climate change movement and holding your bank to account.
True. Well, I'm probably one of these person that keeps being engaged in different things, and I always I have a huge interest in climate change. That's also coming from have a background in geography. Then you are conscious about everything in the world, the climate, economics, social science, is the whole package. And recently I asked our pension company to have some more climate change in their investment portfolio, or at least investing more into a net zero asset portfolio of investments. That will be up in 2 weeks, and see if the General Assembly will accept our proposals. But
that's great.
Yeah,
it's puts a smile on my face. Well, I can obviously talk to you for hours, because I just think we have so much in common, and I really like how you think, and it's just been a pleasure so far to build and shape out and color in the lines of the think tank with you. I think our listeners probably need to get back to their real lives, but I hope that they've gotten a little bit of a sense of what we intend to do with the think tank. Do you have any parting ideas to leave them with before we let them start their Friday night?
Partying ideas, or just ideas in general?
Oh, no, I meant parting. we can partying ideas is good too. Yeah.
Well, another Friday, right?
Another skill set.
Yeah, the parties usually start with gin or tonic, but no, how to partake. I think watch the space of human-centered design thinking, challenge the way that that you usually do things. Grab the opportunity that the world has been shaking up a bit. That's a good opportunity to think about. Well, everybody starts thinking about their life because there's not much to do, right? But also, how is the organization working? Are we actually creating that change we actually want, or should we do something differently? If we keep doing the same thing, nothing is really not really going to change. So I think that's also what the EHC has done for many years, trying new approaches, trying new ways, because you can see that if you keep going, doing the same thing all over again, it might not change as you want. So I think that probably just the last comment I have.
So with that, I will thank our listeners for listening in and sharing this moment with us. And well, I look forward to just getting back to work together. But I also look forward to publicly launching the think tank, seeing it begin to run, begin to work, and inviting everybody that has thoughts, comments, questions to come and find us.
Absolutely.
And maybe we can end with a nice, warm, happy Hemophilia Day and happy Hemophilia Week for our lovely community.